Over the following days, Hobbes became increasingly obsessed with the idea that Azazel was somehow connected to the case. He couldn't shake the feeling that the murders were being orchestrated by something, or someone, far more dangerous than a simple human killer. Hobbes began to investigate the strange encounter further, diving into records of similar cases, all while trying to piece together the puzzle of Reese's death. As he dug deeper, he found something that chilled him to his core. There were no records of anyone named Azazel, not in any police database, nor in any of the usual criminal intelligence networks. That was when Hobbes' theory began to shift. The killings weren't random acts of violence. They were a series of ritualistic murders, each one designed to conceal a deeper, more horrifying truth. Hobbes began to suspect that someone, or something, was controlling the murders, orchestrating each crime with an eerie precision. But who, and why? Then came the moment when Hobbes finally connected the dots. He was at the morgue, staring down at the lifeless body of Reese. As he examined the body, something caught his eye. The skin around Reese's fingers seemed wrong. It was as though the very touch of death had left an imprint on the body, an imprint that was not human. Hobbes examined the hands more closely, and that was when he saw it. A strange pattern of burns, as if someone had pressed their palm against Reese's skin and seared it with unearthly heat. Suddenly, a memory from the night Reese was killed flashed through Hobbes' mind. The strange, empty look in Reese's eyes as he had attacked. The way Reese's body seemed to move with an unnatural precision, as if he were no longer in control of his own actions. It wasn't just that Reese was dead, it was that Reese's soul had somehow been taken from him. The killer, Hobbes realized, wasn't just a man. The true culprit was something far more insidious, a being that had found a way to slip into the skin of others. Azazel was no longer merely a suspect. He was the key. The next few days brought a series of unsettling encounters that solidified Hobbes' worst fears. Each one seemed to confirm that Azazel was not just a man. He was something else entirely, something ancient, something evil. Hobbes started to piece together the ritualistic elements of the killings, and the chilling possibility began to surface. It wasn't just the victims who were dying, it was their very souls that were being stolen. The more Hobbes learned, the more horrifying the implications became. Azazel wasn't a killer in the traditional sense. He was a demon, an entity capable of transferring his soul into the bodies of others. It wasn't just that Reese had been murdered, it was that his soul had been possessed. Reese's body was still walking, still breathing, but the man Hobbes had known was gone, replaced by a demonic force that sought only to spread its malevolence. And it wasn't just Reese. Each victim had been touched by Azazel, each one a stepping stone in the demon's path of destruction. It wasn't long before Hobbes encountered another victim, a man named Charles, a quiet, unassuming clerk who had witnessed something strange the night of one of the murders. He told Hobbes of a strange man who had approached him, touched his arm, and then vanished. Charles had never seen him before, but the memory haunted him. Hobbes soon realized that Charles was just another victim of Azazel, someone whose soul would be taken if he wasn't careful. Hobbes tried to warn Charles, but it was too late. The moment Hobbes touched Charles's hand in an attempt to comfort him, he felt it, the faint but unmistakable pulse of something dark and ancient, a presence that made his skin crawl. The feeling was one of possession, a slow, creeping sensation that told Hobbes that the demon was near, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. That night, Hobbes stayed in his apartment, barely able to sleep, tortured by the realization that he wasn't just fighting a human killer. He was facing an evil so old, so powerful, that it was beyond anything he could comprehend. Azazel wasn't a man. He was a force of nature, a dark spirit that could move from body to body, leaving behind only destruction in his wake. And Hobbes wasn't sure how much longer he could resist the demon's touch. The more Hobbes learned about Azazel's powers, the more desperate his situation became. There was no way to stop the demon through conventional means. Azazel had no physical form, no body that could be destroyed. The only way to stop him was to sever the connection between him and the people he possessed. But that would mean finding a way to banish Azazel from their souls. The stakes had never been higher. As Hobbes struggled to understand the true nature of the possession, his encounters with the demon grew more frequent. Azazel seemed to toy with him, appearing in fleeting glimpses, sometimes in the form of a stranger, sometimes as someone Hobbes knew, always just a few steps ahead. It was as though Azazel wanted Hobbes to understand the horror of his existence before he claimed him as another pawn in his unholy game. It was during one of these encounters that Hobbes saw the demon's true power for the first time. He had been following a lead when he encountered a man who seemed to be in a trance. The man's eyes were wide, unblinking, and his body jerked in spasms, as though he was being controlled by an unseen force. Hobbes recognized him as one of Azazel's victims, a man whose body had been overtaken by the demon. As the man turned to face Hobbes, he grinned, and for a moment, Hobbes saw not the man, but something far darker, something ancient, evil, and hungry. Azazel had taken control, and Hobbes was now in his sights. It was in that moment that Hobbes realized the full extent of Azazel's power. The demon was not just possessing bodies, he was rewriting reality itself, manipulating the very fabric of existence. No one was safe. No place was safe. Azazel could be anywhere, at any time. The only thing Hobbes had left was the truth, the knowledge that this demon, this force of darkness, was unstoppable, unless he could find a way to sever the chains of possession once and for all. But as the demon's presence continued to grow, Hobbes could only wonder, was it already too late? Had Azazel already won? The battle for Hobbes' soul, and the souls of everyone around him, had only just begun. Hobbes sat in the dimly lit room, the flickering candle casting shadows across the walls. His head throbbed, the remnants of a sleepless night making every muscle in his body ache. He rubbed his eyes, trying to clear the haze from his vision, but it did little to help. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion, suspicion, and an ever-growing sense of dread. The walls seemed to close in on him, the air thick with the stench of something ancient and malevolent. It was as if the very room was infected by the demon's presence. The demon, Azazel, was still out there, and it was far from finished. The truth had begun to dawn on Hobbes, though it was a truth too horrifying to fully grasp. Azazel, the entity he had been hunting for so long, was no mere demon. It was a force of nature, a parasite that could slip between the cracks of reality and possess any living being it encountered. It could jump from one person to the next, using them as vessels to wreak havoc before moving on to its next victim, leaving nothing but death and despair in its wake. A predator with no master, no limit to its cruelty. No one was safe. Hobbes took a deep breath, his fingers trembling as he reached for the stack of old, brittle books spread across the table. They were his only lead, the scattered remnants of texts detailing demonic rituals, folklore, and ancient histories. It was all he had left to understand Azazel and how to destroy it. But every page he turned only led to more questions, more uncertainty. Every answer seemed to open a new door, one that only led to more darkness. He had seen it firsthand, the demon's power. The first time he had encountered Azazel was years ago, in the quiet, forgotten town of Ashton. People had been disappearing, their bodies found mutilated and disfigured, the marks on their skin eerily resembling the symbols Hobbes had come to associate with Azazel's dark influence. At first, it had seemed like a series of isolated killings. But when Hobbes had dug deeper, he realized the truth. The killings were not random. They were part of something far more insidious. Azazel's possession was not just about physical violence, it was psychological warfare. The demon thrived on fear, tormenting its victims not only through physical pain but by breaking them down mentally, making them question their own reality. Hobbes had witnessed it firsthand, seen the madness in the eyes of those who had been possessed, heard their screams as they begged for release from a fate they could not escape. It was a game, and Hobbes was playing it without even realizing. The demon had a twisted sense of sport. Its victims were pawns in a game of possession, each one serving as a stepping stone to the next. Azazel didn't just kill, it corrupted. It bent the will of those it touched, making them instruments of its own cruelty. The people it possessed were no longer human. They were vessels, hollowed out by the demon's influence, their minds lost to madness. And Hobbes was the unwitting player, caught in Azazel's web. His mind wandered back to the events of the past few days. He had been following a trail of breadcrumbs, a trail that seemed to lead nowhere. Every time he thought he was getting closer to finding Azazel, the demon slipped away, jumping to another victim. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. What terrified Hobbes the most was the realization that Azazel was playing a far more dangerous game than he had anticipated. The demon wasn't just hunting him, it was toying with him. It had been for years. Hobbes closed his eyes, rubbing his temples as the memories flooded back. He had seen the signs before, in other places, other times. The demon's mark, an intricate symbol, burned into the flesh of its victims, was always the same. But the mark wasn't just a symbol of possession, it was a signature, a taunt. Azazel was mocking him. It was as if the demon was daring him to catch it, to stop it. But no matter how hard Hobbes tried, the demon always eluded him. The candle flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. Hobbes looked up, startled by the movement. His eyes darted to the door, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching him. But the room was empty. The silence felt suffocating, oppressive, as if the air itself was alive, pressing in on him. He stood up, pacing the room. His mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. Azazel wasn't just playing a game with him. It was manipulating the very fabric of reality, jumping from one person to the next, creating chaos wherever it went. The demon was everywhere, hiding in plain sight, using its victims as puppets.